W3c Narrative Transitions is meant to help us deal with gaps of time in the narratives that we work with, in a sense of helping us better build the story rather than simply leaping ahead or leaping backward. So the 3 level of this particular target asks that we can consistently and effectively use a variety of techniques to sequence events, or arrange events, so that they build on one another to create a coherent whole and build toward a particular tone and outcome. For instance, if you are writing a horror story, then you would want to create suspense in your story through the use of transitions, through the use of chapter breaks, and so on and so forth. The 4 level asks very similar style, just that it's unique. And in that sense, what I'm really looking for here is no errors in how you transition, no questions left hanging unless they should be hanging, if it's a mystery piece. At the 2 level, you're inconsistent or ineffective. So I'm going to show you 3 different techniques. Let's say you try one of them, but it doesn't come across as well as it could. That might be a case of being inconsistent or ineffective. And at the 1 level, as a whole, you're inconsistent or ineffective. There's very little that actually does work, although you did try the techniques I'm about to show you. So the flashback is the first method of transition that we're going to talk about. And you might also think about this as a flash forward. You can use it in a similar fashion to talk about events that will occur later in your story and then circle back around before they happened. But the flashback itself, the traditional flashback, is describing events which happened in the past to help us better understand what's going on in the current story. In order to use this, you'd want to identify a moment which would enhance your current story, and that's key. Don't just throw in a flashback because you need something, but really think about what will help us better understand your character. Why is a character a certain way is a good way to go about it. Why did an event happen if you can't think of the character? But I'd really start with that character. Flashbacks are great for helping to reveal why characters behave in the ways that they do. You'll also want to make sure that you format it in a different font or with other indicators of change. So you might verbally say that you are reflecting back in time, or you might use a different font or a chapter heading to help indicate that we're traveling back in time. The key is to make it clear so that your reader isn't confused about where we are actually in the chronology of the story. In Harry Potter, the transition is made quite clear. Harry Potter goes into the pensive to see the events which influence the current story, such as the trials of Voldemort's supporters and Dumbledore's memories of Voldemort himself, and we see that throughout the different books. But the key is that we're always told that he's going into it, and although the first time we don't understand what is happening, it's made very clear to us when he comes out that that is in fact what he was doing, that he was looking at other people's memories and therefore looking into the past. So that's key. Again, make sure that you make it clear that we're looking at past events. Using multiple points of view is another technique you might consider for helping to transition and better build your story. This is simply telling the story from multiple characters' perspectives, and this will help us develop a richer story. You want to consider which characters can offer differing and interesting perspectives. Again, don't just throw this in because, but really think what other character has a unique voice, what other character can tell us a different angle on the story and help us better understand why something happened the way that it did. You'll also want to decide if characters will tell the same or different parts of the story. Maybe your character Jane wasn't present when a key event went down, but her brother Joe was. Joe could tell us about that event. And then determine, too, how to show changes in perspective. Just like when we're talking about traveling backward in time or traveling forward in time, you want to make clear to your reader that we have a different point of view. Some authors do this through chapter headings labeled by the perspective that is being shared. Some authors will do this simply by small dash lines as a break, something like this, between the different sections of text. Just make clear in some way that there's been a change. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the opening chapter is actually not following Harry. We follow Voldemort's activities at the start through a muggle's eyes, Frank, who is going to check on the house that he has been guardian of for several years. And so we don't get anything from Harry at all until he wakes up from the dream of it. And we get to see the horror that is Voldemort through someone who does not have magic. And I think that makes it all the more powerful and frightening because of that. Probably one of the most traditional ways to help transition in a narrative would be by chapters. And when we're talking about chapters, we're usually also talking about titles that will go along with those chapters. And again, we've been referring back to that. You can use those chapter titles to help make clear when you're changing time or you're changing character point of view, but you can use them in general too, just to help transition within the story itself. The key here is breaking your plot into small chunks. They're usually focused around a single rising action or a mini conflict, if you like to think of it that way. I like to use my outline to help decide this, so I would identify logical sections based on the action in the outline. And then, again, decide how you want to indicate chapter breaks. Do you just want to number? Do you want to actually come up with names? Do you want to just do a little squiggly line? Figure that out. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, J.K. Rowling went with names, and they help foreshadow what the chapter will be about. So that's a nice thing about chapter titles, is they can help give your reader a clue as to what they're about to deal with. The Boy Who Lived gives us the backstory of Harry, how he survived when no one else did. The letters from no one help indicate that he's getting these mysterious letters from the school, but he doesn't understand where they're coming from. The Keeper of the Keys is foreshadowing Hagrid's arrival, and so on and so forth. Now here's the example that we've been working on, just the basic outline, and I'm going to talk through how I might add in some of these techniques. Again, just to recap, our main conflict here revolves around our character Jane, who has two conflicts, one that she's facing depression and two that she doesn't get along with her coworkers for various reasons. Now we actually did a bit of a flash forward in the hook of this piece. We have her hiding in her office bathroom crying after a nasty comment, and we really wanted to tie that into her having gotten ripped apart by her coworkers, but then we go back and tell the story of how that happened with the exposition and the conflict. So we've already got that at play. We could also work in a flashback. In the rising action, Jane believes she'll never be good at her job. We might choose to add in a flashback where she remembers other mistakes she has made. And if we're going to do it in flashback format, we're going to go back and tell the story as if it's happening now. That's another key about flashbacks. It's not saying Jane remembered when she messed up before. It's going back, using different text to say Jane was standing in front of the judge as he scowled down upon her. You made a mistake, he said. It's really getting into it as if it's happening now. In order to work in a different character perspective, we look at the climax here. She quits her job, she says she quits, she walks out, and maybe we get a bit of perspective from her boss. He reflects, look, some reflection there, W3b, that Jane was always too soft, but he wanted to give her a chance. Too bad it ended up this way. So we might see that maybe he is human after all, maybe he isn't such a bad guy, maybe she was the one who really needed to change, maybe it was her self-conflict that was really the problem. And in that sense, we build a richer story. As far as where we might break up the action, I think it'd be reasonable if we were developing in this to a lengthier story to have this hook as an initial first chapter, really developing the emotion of the scene, pulling us right in. It wouldn't be long. I would anticipate maybe just a couple of pages of development of her reflecting on what's going on in her life. Then I think I would combine the exposition and the conflict into a chapter, help give some background on where she is, why she's there, and what her problems are. From there, each rising action could really be its own chapter, especially if we're looking at doing some flashbacks here. That's going to give us plenty to work with to create separate chapters. The climax, clearly its own chapter, major turning point, that is generally by itself. And then I would combine the following action and resolution here. They often are. Help wrap up what she decides to do and why she decides to do it. And that is just a quick example of how you might incorporate these 3 transition techniques.